What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined today by Michael Augello and Andre Leal of the Hockey News. Lots going on the hockey calendar right now. We've got trades, we've got extensions, we've got the draft starting tomorrow. So we've got lots to talk about. Before we get into all of it, though, do want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right, guys, speaking of action, Mike, in your neck of the woods in Buffalo, who would have thought, who would have predicted that Alex Tuch would not be with the Buffalo Sabres? Certainly not you. You never predicted that, right? No, just kidding. Of course, Mike has predicted for a while now, and it is now true that the Buffalo Sabres have moved on from Alex Tuch. They agreed to a sign and trade to send Tuch to the Washington Capitals in exchange for a 2027 third round pick and David Kempf. So the Sabres first signed Tuch to that 8-year, $84 million extension. So that's 10.5 million AAV, which I think, Mike, as you correctly predicted, he was going to be making more than 10 million a year on his next contract. So this now comes after the Capitals traded for Jordan Kyrou from the St. Louis Blues. So now they've got Tuch, Kyrou, and Tom Wilson as their top three right wingers. So a pretty good bit of business there for Washington. Mike, what do you think of this deal for the Sabres from your perspective? And then what do you think of it from the Capitals' perspective?
Well, I mean, Jarmo Kekalainen did not budge when it came to Tuch. There clearly was marching orders. I don't know if it was from ownership or basically a decision that was made by the club going back as far as the beginning of last season. But, as we've said on this show previously, ever since Adrian Kempe signed that $10.625 million deal with Los Angeles, the Bartletts, who are Tuch's representatives, use that as a benchmark. And the Sabres were clearly never willing to go over $10 million. Apparently, Pierre LeBrun reported last night that the Sabres improved their offer to just under $10 million, but wouldn't go the full 8 years. So they got a third round pick as opposed to Toronto getting a fifth round pick for Darren Radish. But, Tuch was the most prominent unrestricted free agent in this class. As for the Capitals, it's a little risky because Tuch is 30 years old, but he scored 30 goals or more the 3 of the last 4 years. And we know Alex Ovechkin is either going back to Russia this summer or next summer. So they needed to replace him. So it's a good ad for them. And 10.5 million on an 8-year deal is sort of par for the course. The cap's going up, and that's the price of poker. They paid it. Other teams didn't get a chance to. So it's a good move for the Capitals and an understandable move for the Sabres.
And getting that 8-year extension in right under the wire as well before that option goes away here with the new CBA. Andre, what do you think of the deal for both sides, both Buffalo and Washington? Do you think they both got a fair shake out of this?
I'd say Buffalo, with just trading away Tuch's signing race, that's still a pretty good haul, I guess. Third rounder certainly isn't nothing, and a roster player in camp. From a Washington perspective, it's very interesting to me where, without knowing exactly how Ovechkin's going to take this offseason, if he's done completely or if maybe he'll come back for a year or something like that. With the Capitals' moves for Tuch and Kyrou, I wonder if it's just them preparing to be without him, like Michael said, or if it's just going to be a way to convince him to stay one more year with an even better roster. Another thing I see with the Capitals is with Ryan Leonard, what's his role going to be now with the team moving forward? I mean, with, Wilson and now Protas on the top with Kyrou and Tuch coming in, there's not a whole lot of space on the wing, especially if Ovechkin comes back. So Leonard's going to be stuck on that third line for however long those new additions are going to remain in Washington. So it's interesting on a level of aspects, but I think they're two great additions for Washington nonetheless.
Well, on the Buffalo side of the equation here, Mike, another move that you predicted was coming was the extension for Zach Benson. Obviously, sure that played into the decision not to spend more than $10 million a year on Alex Tuch because they are saving cap space for Zach Benson. They did sign Benson to a 7-year contract with a $7.5 million AAV. Benson's 21 years old. He was set to become an RFA after he had a career high 43 points in 65 games this past season. So, Mike, you predicted that this extension was coming. What do you think of the value both for the player and the team?
Well, I mean, after the playoff that Benson had, it was necessary to get him signed to as long an extension as possible. And Kekalainen said that at the end of the season that was their intention. And he even said it yesterday. He sort of, previewed himself by saying that they were close. It's a good value. I mean, it's slightly more than what Josh Doan was paid on a 7-year deal earlier in the season. I think there's a lot of growth potential in terms of Benson stepping up his offense. He only scored 13 goals this year. I think he's a 20 to 25 goal scorer who could probably be in the 60 to 65 point range. And his annoying qualities, especially in the playoffs, are something that are definitely beneficial and made him a fan favorite in Buffalo. I'll just say, though, the one thing, of course, you have to, sort of go to the negative here as well as the positive. With the departure of Bowen Byram via trade and now the departure of Alex Tuch, that's 44 goals from last season that the Sabres are in the hole with. Now, Benson will grow, and they have some young players like Hellenius and Osland and Kulik who will step up. But if they stay with what they have right now, there's a big hole, and they could fall into that group of teams that not challenge for the Atlantic Division title, but will be challenging for a wild card spot. So that, Kekalainen is open to trading some draft capital to add some players, and that might be something that he looks at on draft weekend and going into July 1st.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at it in sort of the bigger picture like that. Benson, like you said, I think shades of Brad Marchand. If you're in Buffalo, you love him. If you're outside of Buffalo, not so much. But Andre, what do you think of not only the playoff performance that Zach Benson had that led to this contract extension, and how do you see him growing and his role growing with the Sabres?
Yeah, like Michael said, his playoff campaign is really what set the mark. I mean, I'm sure he made most of his money on this new contract from that campaign, even after a respectable regular season for sure. Like Michael said, fan favorite. He's going to be locked in Buffalo for a while now, and especially if they're going to become more of a playoff contending and serious team, they're going to need him for sure. So I think it's great for both sides. Yeah, and now this is Kekalainen didn't have his hands on a lot of the roster last season. We were all saying it's still Kevin Adams' team, even though he's gone. But the Tuch trade and now this signing of Benson, it's really Kekalainen's team now. We can really start to see what and judge him based on the moves he's making now to see how his tenure is going to play out.
Well, it's officially Kekalainen's team in Buffalo. It is officially Chris McFarland's team in Nashville. He traded for Jack Drury, kind of bringing the players from Colorado now over to Nashville. He did it with Ross Colton. Now he's doing it with Jack Drury. So the Predators and Avalanche already made a trade. They got Drury, they got Chase Bradley, and a 2027 third-round pick from the Avalanche in exchange for two forwards, two former first-round picks in Nashville, Zach Leroux and Fedor Svechkov. So the Preds have now made a couple of moves to round out their bottom six. They've acquired Drury and Ross Colton. Like I said, that makes sense after losing guys at the deadline last year, like Michael McCarron, like Cole Smith. They were still without Colton Sissons from the previous offseason. So just rounding out their bottom six now. Of course, Drury is an RFA. He's going to need to be signed. The assumption is that Nashville will make him that qualifying offer and sign him. But what do you think of this decision to acquire Drury, Mike? Do you see Nashville making a bigger swing at all this offseason, or do you think it's going to be mostly little moves like this?
it's tough to see them making big swings with, so much, I would say, salary tied up with guys like Marchessault and Stamkos. And I mean, I think there's a hunger there for McFarland to maybe, shift things around a little bit. Ryan O'Reilly doesn't have no trade protection, but if they operate on the same wavelength as they did under Barry Trotz, where he doesn't have a no trade, but we're not going to ask him to waive the no trade because we promised them all that, that to me, that doesn't work. It's like if you get a trade, you make a trade. Now, I like these additions. Colton is a solid pro who can play wing or center. I mean, Drury was part of the Martin Necas Rantanen deal, and he played well for Colorado, and he had 10 goals last season. I think it was simply the fact that they couldn't afford to pay him because they're right up against it. And if they paid him on a multi-year deal, then that cuts into what they are able to pay Cale Makar on a new deal. And I think that's the main focus in Colorado, is we have to clear enough cap space to be able to pay Makar what could be $16, $17, $18 million a year with the cap going up. So a good bit of business by McFarland bringing in a couple veterans. And I think that doesn't do anything other than help the Predators be more competitive next year.
Well, I think for Nashville too, you look at Drury, he's 26 years old and brings a lot of experience for that age bracket, which Nashville does not have a lot of right now. Like you said, a lot of their cap is tied up in older veterans or very young players, guys like Matthew Wood, Reed Schaefer, who just came into the league. So I think it's a good bit of business for Nashville. And Andre, like I said, and like Mike alluded to as well, Drury was going to be owed a contract, and he was owed a pay raise based on the way that he played last season. Colorado obviously not going to be able to fulfill that, and they would be really overpaying a fourth line center if that's what they were doing. So I think this trade gives Drury more of a defined role in Nashville, allows him to kind of grow into a bigger role there if he takes on that challenge. So what do you think of this deal, not just for Nashville, for Colorado, but for the player himself?
Yeah, I think it's, Drury is a simple player, but he's a very effective player, and I actually really like him as well as Colton. Those are two guys that maybe got pushed down the lineup in a stacked Avalanche team, right? So Drury is more than a fourth line center. Colton is more than what the role he was given in Colorado. Again, just simply because they have so much depth, specifically in the forward group. So I like these two ads for Nashville. Really brings them, some more middle of the lineup depth, and a couple players that can do more than just, one thing. Drury is great in the face-off dot. Colton can score a few, so that's going to help Nashville a lot. And just looking back at these, couple of deals that Colorado and Nashville have made, I find it really cute, I guess, that the two friends. It's like a fantasy league where the two friends are only trading with each other. So it'll be funny to see who McFarland finally trades with, other than Colorado. But yeah, two great additions for Nashville nonetheless.
Yeah, those guys had definitely been getting pushed down the lineup. They have an embarrassment of riches in Colorado, which certainly cannot be said for a lot of teams, including Nashville. So definitely good to see them add and sort of round out their forward group there. And I'm with you. I'm interested to see whenever a trade happens, not with Colorado, who's it going to be? Because, you know that Chris McFarland, he's been in this business. He's been in this league for a long time. So it's not like he doesn't have relationships with other teams and other front offices. So Nashville is going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on. They pick at number 10 in the draft this year. McFarland says they expect to pick at number 10, so don't expect to see that pick being traded, but nonetheless going to be an interesting offseason in Nashville. Speaking of trades, or maybe potential trades, according to Darren Dreger, Morgan Rielly's agent has submitted 4 Western-based teams to the Toronto Maple Leafs that he is willing to be traded to. He added Rielly is apparently flexible on this list, and GM John Shaika said at his pre-draft media availability that as of now, he does expect Rielly to be with the club in the fall. But that being said, we know now that the the list has been submitted as far as these teams that he's willing to be traded to. So, Mike, what teams stand out to you that you think Morgan Rielly would be interested in at this stage? And, what team do you think would make the most sense for the Leafs to trade him to?
Well, a couple of the California teams, I'll pick one, and let's say the Anaheim Ducks, because they have Trouba, Gudas as unrestricted free agents. John Carlson is obviously going to market on July 1, so they'd probably be looking for a veteran defenseman with the young guys like Lacombe and Mintyukov and Zellweger there. But the thing is, right now, and the stance that Chaika took at the pre-draft availability today is, there's a narrative out there from the geniuses and the wannabe GMs on social media and the blogosphere that, you got to give away, and some commentators on some of the major outlets, that you're going to have to take a bad contract back and take a mid-round pick for a guy who at 32 years old is still a good NHL defenseman. He's just not a top pairing defenseman. And he was, essentially weighed down by the stupidity of Craig Berube and the way he managed the roster. So if you get something of value for Morgan Rielly in a trade, then okay, maybe it's time to move on. He's capable of playing a mid-pairing role. He's just not a top pairing guy anymore. And if you don't get something worthwhile, you keep him. And I don't think that's a bad scenario, but apparently a lot of people out there in social media will lose their mind if Morgan Rielly is wearing number 44 in blue and white next year.
Yeah, it's a name that's definitely been in the rumor mill since last year. Again, like you said, this wouldn't be a salary dump by any means. I don't think that you'd be dumping a useless player or a player who's dead weight on your roster. But Andre, what do you think if the Leafs are to trade Rielly? It would have to be, a pretty decent return. So when you're looking at potential trade partners, trade suitors, who do you think could be a good match for Toronto here?
Michael made a great point about Anaheim with, even though they do need a veteran defenseman, even with Anaheim, you can still get a young piece back. They do have some assets. And I'll say the same thing for the San Jose Sharks, maybe to a lesser extent, where they still do need a veteran defenseman. I mean, off the top of my head, I can only think of Dmitry Orlov that's staying past this offseason. And then they got, Sam Dickinson, who'll need some veteran presence. So I see San Jose as a good, partner, especially with also the assets that they can provide. And aside from that, I think Michael hit it on the head here. I mean, we can appreciate that Rielly hasn't had the greatest last 2 seasons under Berube, but it's to say he will be a cap dump doesn't really, make sense to me. He at a 7.5 million cap hit, maybe that's a little above what he's been providing, but with the cap going up to what it is now, it really doesn't almost matter. I mean, 7.5 to, I guess it's 104 million coming up now. It's really a sliver of that, and to what he's been playing at, I mean, I guess what would his value actually be? Maybe $1 million less maximum. So yeah, unless you get a really good package that you can say that you are getting better off of a move from that, it doesn't make sense just to dump him for, mid-range picks or another bad contract. The Leafs need to get better, and, Czech is not going to do a move that he doesn't see his team getting better. So I agree with that point 100%.
Well, and Morgan Rielly is not the only name showing up in the rumor mill around Toronto. Leading up to the draft on Friday, again, rumors have started to intensify around the possibility of the Leafs trading Matthew Knies. So this is not new. We heard about this last year at the deadline. Then the rumors have kind of quieted a bit since then, but we're starting to hear a little bit more now. So, Mike, based on the trade packages that we've seen around the league already just in these last few days, what do you think would be a reasonable package for Knies if Toronto does decide to trade him? And do you think that Toronto should trade him?
Well, I've long thought that this has been a fishing expedition because Knies has no trade protection. If there's a deal being offered out there that blows Chaika away, then you'd be foolish not to explore the possibility. Now, in his availability this morning, he said he did talk to Chicago about the number 4 pick. And I'm assuming that Knies, since Chicago has been rumored to be interested in him, would have been part of the whatever the package would be going to Chicago. But I've long said that if you're trading a forward at 23 years old who had 66 points last year, who's locked up for 5 more years, it's under $8 million, you better get overpaid. This is better be a grand slam home run by Chaika. So if he wasn't getting Anton Frundell and the 4th overall or Lev Shunov and the number 4, then you don't talk. And I know there's chatter out there in Buffalo, especially about, they're one of the other teams along with Montreal as being teams that are interested in Knies. Inside your own division, you pay an Atlantic Division tax. So if Buffalo is interested in Matthew Knies, that's great. Okay, how about the number 4 and Consta Helenius? Other than that, hang up the phone. They want to compete this year. Matthew Knies is going to be a big part of it. So unless you're getting completely, unless you're taking the other team completely to the cleaners, you don't make that trade.
Andre, do you think that this is more of just a fishing expedition, like Mike said, or do you think there's actual, credence to this rumor that Knies might get traded?
I think it is a bit of a fishing expedition, and I think that's your job as the GM to see what you can get, and how far people will go. But again, like Augello said, you have to be sure about this. If you are going to move off him, you have to be really satisfied about the return and almost walk away snickering about what you maybe done, because a player like Knies, no matter what status the Maple Leafs are going to be next year, there's a case for Matthew Knies to stay. If you're rebuilding, he's a young player who will be, a star coming up. If you're competing for a playoff spot, he's going to be a big piece of that roster to push you in. If you're competing for a Stanley Cup, he's a great young power forward who already has, a good chunk of experience in a couple seasons in Toronto. So, and again, unless you're blown out of the water, there really shouldn't be a real reason to move this guy. He's so important to this roster and will be for some time.
Well, he is very important to the Maple Leafs roster. Another guy who has been very important to his team's roster in a very short amount of time is Quinn Hughes in Minnesota. So lots of eyes going to be on the Minnesota Wild this offseason. Craig Leopold, the Wild's owner, did a radio interview on Minnesota Public Radio yesterday. He talked about the ongoing negotiations with Quinn Hughes. So you don't always hear things like this or insight like this from an ownership perspective, but we got that from Craig Leopold. He said, quote, "We had to give up a lot to get him this past year. We are going to re-sign him. The question will be for how long. We would like to go as long as we could. He will probably want it to be a little shorter being maybe 3 years. Hopefully we'll end up at 5. I don't know. And the reason I can openly talk about this is I'm not doing the negotiating. So I'm sure Bill Guerin really appreciates that on his part. But I think, you're getting a sort of, you can see the confidence here from Leopold that a deal is going to get done. And it's just a matter of how long. So Mike, you see the confidence, you see how certain he is. What do you think this deal will end up looking like at the end of the day?
I don't think it's coincidental that 3 years was mentioned. And if you look at Puckpedia and you see, Jack Hughes is signed for till 2030, and a 3-year deal would be till 2030. So I think that's where we're going here. So yeah, I'd see if he's got a year left in his contract at $7.8 million. Honestly, I think he's going to double that. I think he's going to probably be in the $15 to $16 million range. And with the cap going up, with Kaprizov making 17, he would be under Kaprizov, but he would still get a nice raise. And, you have him for 3 more years and you have a good chance at contending for a Stanley Cup. You're still in a very tough division, but I think the goal has always been with the Hughes brothers to play in the same place. And that doesn't mean New Jersey, but it could be the same place like Detroit or wherever. But I think that he can sign an extension with Minnesota and fulfill his dream to play with his brothers. And I think that's what's going to end up happening.
Andre, what do you think happens with Quinn Hughes in Minnesota?
It's hard not to say that they'll try and line it up. I mean, it's been clear before that there is a motivation for them to play together. From a Minnesota Wild standpoint, at least you can say that you've put your team in a position to win, to be competitive. So any, narrative that Hughes might not be a fan of, where the team is going, like that's completely gone. It's not like in Vancouver where, they're trending downwards. So the only really situation you got to worry about is the reunion of the brothers, right? So there is that to look out for. I will say that Leopold has been very crafty with his comments, because if I remember correctly, he did like a similar thing with Kaprizov when his contract was up, and he kind of made some comments, either putting pressure on Guerin or putting pressure on the player, and sounds like that's what he's doing again. So it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds for Hughes and the Wild. Yeah.
Well, it's Leopold's money, right? So if he wants to to make the comments, he can make the comments. But still, nonetheless, a situation to monitor there in Minnesota. I want to wrap up today, Mike. We alluded to it earlier with the trade with the Sabres, but the Blackhawks now, they have paid a hefty price to acquire Bowen Byram from the Buffalo Sabres. That hefty price, namely being the 4th overall pick in this year's draft. So the Blackhawks now, they got Byram, but they got to work on an extension for him because he is entering the final season of his 2-year, $12 million deal. So what do you think the Blackhawks end up signing him for? Do you think that they should be concerned about losing leverage in negotiations, considering they paid so much to acquire him in the first place? And what do you see this extension looking like?
Well, the first thing that I asked Jarmo Kekalainen about at the media availability yesterday out in Orchard Park was, did you give permission to Kyle Davidson to speak to Darren Ferris, Byram's representative? Because had he not, Kyle Davidson should be fired on the spot, because you need to nail down what it's going to cost. Otherwise, you don't trade for a guy who's 1 year away from unrestricted free agency and has Darren Ferris as an agent. So he did give him permission. So I would only expect that they nailed out the structure of the deal. Now, he can't sign an extension until July 1st. That being said, I think more than likely, we know Byram's desire to be a number one defenseman somewhere. He played behind Makar in Colorado. He played behind Dahlin in Buffalo. He wants to be the number one. He definitely will be the number one in Chicago. But he wants to get paid. And he's only 25 years old. So I would say at an absolute minimum, it has to be a 4-year deal. I would hope that Davidson would get 5 or more. But if it's a shorter term deal, I don't think there's going to be any discount because of Darren Ferris being the agent. I think it's going to end up being 13 and a half, maybe even 14 million. And that's not a great deal for somebody who has not established himself as a number one defenseman. He's extremely talented. He's won a Stanley Cup, but it's a roll of the dice. But if Davidson, as you said, Emma, has no leverage whatsoever, and if all of a sudden Darren Ferris says, oh, I don't remember that conversation, then Chicago is screwed. Then Kyle Davidson's as bad a general manager as Stan Bowman.
Well, that is saying something. I do think that, like you said, he's extremely talented, Bo Byram is, but he is still, it's hard to believe he's still only 25 years old. But at the same time, you have to remember he's young. He does have a lengthy injury history as well. And I don't mean that as a knock against him or to say that he shouldn't get paid necessarily, but it's something to consider. So, Andre, when you look at this, again, like Mike said, starting July 1st, Byram will be eligible to sign an extension. You got to assume that there's already a plan in place, like he said. What do you think this contract ends up looking like?
Well, Michael said that if Davidson hadn't, made that plan that he suggested, and he should be fired on the spot, I think there's still plenty of time for that to happen after this deal's signed, right? I heard that Byram could be waiting to see what Makar and Hughes get on their next deals. And that scares me a little bit, because that's suggesting that he should be, like what Michael said, in the 13 million range. I think that's ludicrous, right? Like if it was up to me just calling out his value, I think it shouldn't be more than 10. And I really like Byram. He's a very well like well-rounded defenseman who can, play in all situations, has a cup. Like you said, I'm only 25 with all this experience and achievements. But you guys are right. He hasn't established himself as a number 1D just yet, like he wants to be. So I don't know. We got to see what happens here. Something still could happen to Davidson after this deal, and we're looking at it, 2 years in the rearview mirror, and it's just way too much. So we'll see what happens. Yeah.
We will indeed. Of course, like I mentioned, we've got the draft starting tomorrow, Friday in Buffalo. Mike will be there providing coverage for us for the Hockey News. If you want to read any of our draft coverage, any coverage of the trades and other moves that seem to be inevitable right now after the busy week we've already had in the NHL, please head over to the Hockey News. It's the go-to for all things hockey, has been since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. That's going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in today. We really do appreciate it. We will be back with an all new episode next Tuesday, probably with some more trades to report on. But for now, for Michael Augello and Andre Leal, I'm Emma Lingan. This is the Wraparound, and we will see you next time.